Good evening. I'd like to really thank people who last month offered suggestions and requests for programming for next season. And we've already got some new hikes that I think we're going to be able to offer in March and maybe even towards early June on the peninsula through people that are involved with the Bruce Trail Club, either locally or there. Tomorrow, Plant Wilson is offering some access to some migratory monitoring hikes on the peninsula. So that's really exciting. And we've also already booked Beth Gillespie for our speaker for September 14th here. And with her book, her new book, the latest one, on the geology of the Beaver Valley section of the Bruce Trail. And she's also going to be leading a hike in that area on the Stu Hiltz Loop that's in that section, that side trail. And so that's already firmed up. And we've got other potential things fitting into place for next season. I was able to attend the talk that Willie Waterton gave at his exhibition at the Durham Art Gallery just a few weeks ago. And we're going to be working on doing something with the local black bear population, getting an update on that, because we had Jody Shifley a few years ago through friends of Barb and Dave Fiddler, who gave a presentation for us at when we were at the St. Andrew's Church for our final meetings of the year. And we've also got some more just exciting programming lined up coming soon and also for next season. So we're looking forward to that. I received an email about 6 or 7 years ago that came like this: "Greetings, I'm a 14-year-old wildlife photographer." And then he went on to say that he had enjoyed birding a lot since he was young. So I thought, that's pretty good. And the photography is fabulous. So we got to know Kiah Jasper as a birder, but he also, in his communications, we've just watched his communication skills just blossom and grow. And he also did on his blog and Facebook posts some moth photographs of his moth night that he did himself. And it's just amazing work. So I know you're going to be thrilled to see some of his photography here for the first time. It's his first time doing a presentation for the club here, and even being at one of our indoor meetings here. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I'd also like to say that congratulations. How about a hearty round of congratulations for Kiah? On behalf of the club for this 2022 big year of birding. And congratulations also from Dave Fiddler, a former president of this club, who was a preeminent birder and teacher of birding. And I think you may have met him a few years ago. So anyway, just sharing that too. And so I believe that Kiah is also on the board of the OFO, the Ontario Field Ornithologists. And I read one of his articles last year that came to me through Barb Fiddler that I wouldn't have seen otherwise, but it was really intuitive and detailed, and that the photography was there too. So it's great. So I'm just going to invite Kiah up to take it away, and we'll see what he's going to tell us about this journey that he had this past year.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. So as John said, my name is Kiah Jasper. I'm a birder who grew up on the Bruce Peninsula. And last year, I did something that's called an Ontario Big Year. Okay, so first off, yep, that's great, thanks. So first off, show of hands, who knows what a big year is? Anyone? Okay, so basically everyone here does. For the few that don't, and just to refresh in people's memory though, a big year is an attempt to see as many birds as possible during a calendar year in like a defined geographic region. So the histories of big years, it's pretty long. The first one that I know of was in 1939, a long time ago. And that was a North American big year undertaken by Roger Tory Peterson. You may have heard of him. So during that year, he traveled all across North America doing research for his book. And that he saw, I think, 459 birds, quite a few. That sparked a few other birders to follow it up. And by this time, I think there's been like something like 300 North America big years undertaken. It's a pretty popular thing. Sometimes birders do like state or province big years or even something like a Bruce County one. But the goal's the same, to see as many birds as possible in any like geographic region. So in 2022, I did an Ontario big year, traveling all across the province in search of birds. Before I tell you about that though, my travels to James Bay, camping in the car for over a month, and generally getting up to trouble, I'm going to tell you a bit about myself. So what got me into birding? Well, when I was around 12 years old, my neighbor gave me a small point and shoot camera. And with that began my interest in photography. I traveled around to like local nature preserves, photographing everything I saw. And I had a particular interest for things that moved, birds, insects, anything that moved around. When I took pictures, I wanted to know what I was photographing. So looking at an old bird guide that I found at home, I soon put names to the birds that I'd photographed. During the winter of 2017, there was a large eruption of snowy owls across southern Ontario, including Bruce County, where up to like 70 could be seen in one day by certain people. I went out and searched them with my father, traveling all across South Bruce Peninsula. And it might have just been my skill level at the time, but I didn't see any snowy owls. I tried my hardest, but I couldn't spot one. I did see a lot of other cool birds along the way though, including horned larks, rough-legged hawks, and golden eagles. The golden eagle may be the bird that connected me first with the birding community. As John said, I emailed him and I asked him if it was a golden eagle or a similar immature bald eagle. John passed me along to the Bruce Birding Club, where I contacted with the president, Fred Jasper. He invited me to attend the club's outings, and I started going on them in early April of 2017. After that, I basically attended every outing for at least 3 or 4 years. During the summer of 2017, I attended an OFO Young Birders Camp, the first of its kind in Algonquin Provincial Park. This was like the first time I met other young birders my age, and it was also the first time I kind of heard about a big year. So during 2017, there was a birder named Jeremy Bensett, and he was doing an Ontario big year. I was very interested in following along, so I followed along with his quest all year until eventually he broke the record in November of 2017, ending up with 347 species. I thought about doing a big year myself, but honestly figured it was a bit of a dream, as I never thought I'd have the time and resources to do it. After I was done my high school education, if you could call it that, I was homeschooled for my whole life. I realized I was going to have a bit of time after that before I started work. So I was kind of mulling over the idea of doing a big year, and then I decided I was just going to go for it. Originally, my plan was to do this in 2021, and I started out around a week, and then a COVID lockdown hit, and I basically had to call it quits. I decided to use this time to my advantage, though, and throughout most of 2021, I worked at various jobs, gathering funds and doing more planning for my 2022 big year. As you can see here, I have a spreadsheet of all the birds in Ontario, and it breaks them down in codes from code 1 all the way to code 6. So like a code 1 bird's a black-capped chickadee or an American robin, something you'd see like around your house or a very common species. And a code 6 is like extinct or maybe 1 or 2 records. So I think I had like 4 or 5 spreadsheets on the go leading up to 2022 with like details of the tough birds, where I could see them, when I could see them, and when I had to see them by. So there's a lot of planning that went into it. Down in the bottom left here, I put the previous Ontario big year records. So Glenn Cody in 1996, Josh Vandermeulen in 2012, and Jeremy Bensett in 2017. Josh wrote an excellent blog during his big year, with a lot of content and information on how he did this. I must have read Josh's some 200 blog posts, maybe 3 or 4 times leading up to my big year, trying to gain information. Another thing I was really looking for, another thing I was researching for planning was how to pack my car, because you may not know this, but when you do a big year, you have to be ready to go at a moment's notice. Even after dark, a rare bird could show up at the far corner of the province, and you have to leave that very moment. So I always had like changes of clothes, food for a few days, sleeping bag, optics, and more, all ready to go in my car. So leading up to 2022, there's a few things that were really working in my favor. The winter of 2021, 2022 was very warm. Some of you may remember this. And there's a lot of overwintering rarities and other like uncommon birds. All of December 2021, the temperatures hovered around 0. And this allowed some birds, including even a hummingbird, a rufous hummingbird from out west, to overwinter successfully in Ontario. So finally, January 1st, the beginning of my big year. In this picture, I'm standing with 4 of my friends in Toronto, where we ended our day on January 1st. Everyone on the 4 leftmost people actually all did big years last year. Normally, like 1 or 2 people partake on big years, and not every year is a series 1 attempted. So for 4 people to do it in 1 year, it was quite unusual. It definitely adds some competition and motivation for like days when I didn't want to go out, and I knew other people were out there catching up to me, so I had no choice. So these are some birds that I saw on January 1st. Top left is a black-bellied whistling duck in Niagara Falls. That's where I started my day. Then I zipped over to 50 Point by Hamilton, where I saw this boreal owl. After that, I went to Oakville and saw the rufous hummingbird, which is top right. And then I went to Guelph and saw a mountain bluebird, which is bottom left. Finally, I zipped up to Toronto and saw a golden crowned sparrow, which is middle right. The picture on the bottom right is me pointing at the black-bellied whistling duck. It was that close to me, if you could believe it. Not giving a care in the world if I was there. So as you can see, it was a pretty hectic day, traveling Niagara, Oakville, Guelph, all the way to Toronto. I ended up with around 59 species, which for 1 day in the winter in January isn't too bad. After cleaning up rarities in Southern Ontario for a few days, I took one of my many trips to the Ottawa region. Here I saw Barrow's goldeneye, gray partridge, which are top right, and red crossbills, which are the 2 birds on the left, a male and a female. Really, there's no rest in the big year, but this is particularly true in January, especially like the first week or 2. You have to see all the overwintering rare birds and try to clean up the common ones too that you may miss. The general strategy of a big year in the winter is you want to see all of the gulls that you can, all of the woodpeckers, all of the owls, and all of the finches. This gets all these birds out of the way for later in the year, and you don't want to be searching for them in November or December. As you can see here, I have a lot of gulls pictured, and some of them you may call seagulls. I wouldn't blame you, but there's actually quite a few species present. Bottom left, I'll start there. That's an immature Iceland gull. So it's similar to herring gulls, but lighter overall. The one above that may look similar, but that's actually a glaucous wing gull, the 2nd record for Ontario. So I saw that one, I think January 7th in Brantford. And that was my only chance of that bird all year. And the picture above that, you can still see the glaucous wing gull. It's kind of like mid-right. And there's also lesser black-back gull, greater black-back gull, Iceland gull, and herring gull in that picture. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a gull with a darker mantle and pink legs. This is a slaty-back gull, and it's another very rare gull that breeds mainly in Asia and Europe. I was back home in Bruce when this was found, and it was down in Niagara region. So I zipped down there and managed to catch up with it. That's a lot of what a big ear is. Like a bird shows up maybe 4, 7, 10 hours away. You instantly have to chase it. And honestly, more often than not, you see it, which always surprises me. Like that you can drive for however many hours and the bird's still there when you arrive. So that was same as the glaucous wing. That was the only slaty-back gull I saw all winter. Oh yeah, and the one bottom right, that's an Iceland gull, an adult. The first big trip of the year was a trip to Thunder Bay on January 9th. I went on this with my 2 fellow big ear birders, Ezra Campanelli and William Conzi. Now you can see on the right picture how full car is during a trip like this. Literally stuffed with gear and supplies. Bottom left, that's the gas price somewhere past Sudbury. It's kind of funny, at that time I thought that was a crazy gas price. Yeah. June, July of 2022 were horrendous. I'm sure many of you remember when gas was like well above $2 in Southern Ontario. Just funny too, like earlier in the pandemic, it was like below $1. So I honestly wish I did the big year then. The bird top left is what I drove up there for. That's called a spotted towhee. Some of you may be familiar with a bird called an eastern towhee. It's fairly common around here. So this is the western counterpart of that bird, breeding like along the western side of North America. 1 or 2 tend to show up in Ontario each year, but you just never know. So when I heard that one was being seen at a feeder near Thunder Bay, I thought I had to try for it. We drove up some 13 hours through a blizzard, which you're going to see in the next slide. You see the picture kind of middle left? Well, let me tell you, visibility was actually way worse than that. We were driving on the northern shore of Lake Superior, which honestly, I don't recommend traveling in that region during the winter, especially at night. I was sleeping in the back. One of the other people was driving, and he was possessed to get there. So we drove right through the night and arrived there at first light. Well, we sort of arrived there at first light. There was a bit of a hiccup in the middle of the night. You see the picture top left? That's the screen on the car. And it's lit up with every possible warning light imaginable. Now, when it's -20 and you're traveling in the winter, you don't really want to see that. We immediately pulled over and the car was just flashing saying, "Do not drive, serious damage may be occurred." So we turned around and went to a nearby motel. Luckily, one of my dad's friends has the same car. And all we had to do was disconnect the battery. It was just like an electrical issue. But yeah, it was a bit concerning. After we saw the spotted towhee, we saw some grosbeaks, both the evening and the pine variety. Pine grosbeaks top right, and then middle bottom is evening and pine grosbeaks together at a feeder. Truly like a breathtaking sight in the winter. The rest of the photos are just like some geography, including one that I can't leave out, the Thunder Bay dump, because birders can't go anywhere without visiting a dump. Am I right? Yeah, so that trip, I think we covered, I don't know, 2,000 kilometers. After Thunder Bay, we cut across to Oak Lake in northeastern Ontario. And it was there that we saw a varied thrush. It was -39 when I saw that. My hands were kind of frozen. I messed up on getting a picture, so you'll have to use your imagination for that one. Later in January, I had what was by far one of my highlights of the big year, a white morph gyrfalcon only 10 minutes away from home on the Bruce Peninsula. Gyrfalcon, you may know, is my favorite bird species. And it's actually the license plate in my car too. I kind of thought having that as my license plate would jinx me during the big year and I'd miss it, but that didn't turn out to be the case. And I actually had gyrfalcon on the other big year birders for almost the entire year. Being able to watch this bird up close, and it was the first time I saw a white morph too. It was just like a breathtaking experience. After that, I had to go north again because that's what big ears involve in the winter. This time I went up with a large group of friends starting in the Timmins Cochrane area. And our main targets were like the boreal specialties, the winter woodpeckers and finches. We were also hoping to see some owls. We succeeded on all accounts, and we saw every target bird that we wanted to see in our trip. Bottom left is a great gray owl. Top left is a sharp-tailed grouse. And then going across the screen is a boreal owl and us photographing, I think, a sharp-tailed grouse beside the road. That was actually my lifer great gray owl. It was a bit of a hectic experience seeing it. We were looking just before sunset. And then one of my friends found it like 5 kilometers away. And we all like drove over there, maybe a bit over the speed limit, and managed to track it down. Next, we visited a boreal burn, which if you're familiar with this, it's a large swath of boreal forest. And if there's a wildfire there, there's a lot of standing dead trees. And these two birds, the blackback woodpecker and the American three-toed woodpecker, are both specialties of this forest type. We snowshoed around 10 kilometers through the forest, and we saw over 40 blackback woodpeckers and 1 American three-toed woodpecker, which was also a lifer for me. The middle bird here is a male spruce grouse. And the picture top right is what happens when you have a group of younger birders that get exhausted after a day of birding. Top left is just a picture of a large snowman. I thought was interesting up there. Now, traveling around Cochrane when it's like minus 35 may sound extreme enough for most of you. And honestly, I'd agree with you. But I decided to take it up a level and drive the winter road. So the winter road, also known as the Weedham Road, connects Attawapiskat to Moosonee, and then all the way down to Smooth Rock Falls, which gives the northern communities connection with southern Ontario during the winter. So our goal for up here was to see a willow ptarmigan. This was a bit of a long shot. A willow ptarmigan is a species of grouse that breeds in the Arctic. And in the winter, it comes as far south as the coast of James Bay. That's as far south as it comes. So we thought we'd give it our best shot, take a 4-day trip up there and see if we could find one. Now, this winter road's only really been open for around 4 years, and no birders have ever tried it out. So it's kind of uncharted territory. But I'm going to tell you, it was such an amazing experience, and by far one of the biggest highlights of 2022. Top left is a picture of a red fox. Now, you may not recognize it. It's called a cross fox. It's a color morph it's like an intermediate between our red fox here and the dark morph red fox that occurs in the Arctic. And honestly, seeing around 10 of those, it was so breathtaking. Like, honestly, like it reminds me of a wolverine, just in the color of it. We saw the Aurora Borealis on 2 nights, bottom left. Now, I've seen that in Bruce before, but normally here you have to use a camera to see it really well. This time there's bright green right overhead, and we got to watch it for hours as we were going to sleep. So I didn't mention this before, but we actually camped on the winter road. There was still a bit of uncertainty about COVID up there at the time, and just to be cautious, we didn't want to go into any of the northern communities. So we camped on the side of the winter road. We were anticipating it to be cold, yeah, but we chanced into a cold spell up there, and the coldest night was minus 41, feels like minus 47. Now, my sleeping bag was rated minus 40, and I had it wrapped in 2 minus 20s. Now, my brain thought that this made it minus 80, but I was mainly just saying this to make myself feel better. The one night I woke up and my nostrils kind of like frozen shut. I was pretty concerned, but I'm here now, so I survived. Honestly, the worst part of that is taking the tent down in the morning, because at that time, nothing's warm. The car, the tent, your sleeping bag, none of your clothes. And for 20 minutes, you have to like take your gloves off. I did have a thin layer underneath, and I had to take apart the tent poles. And just like the level of cold that seeps into your hands during that time, you really don't get it back for a few hours. I swear my feet were cold for that whole trip. The other photos on here are just like some various landscapes. The winter road was a lot better than I was expecting, honestly. I thought it would be like this snow-covered road over the Arctic ice, but it was mainly like better conditions than our roads here. It's like an icy 401. It like stopping is a bit of an issue, yes, but it's if you don't have to stop, it's fine. So it's mainly across bogs, rivers, some parts of the Arctic Ocean, and through the boreal forest. It's like nowhere I've seen before. And witnessing like the large expanses up there of stunted trees, it's, yeah, really the only time I saw that habitat all year. So like I said, it was a 4-day, 3-night trip, and we were hoping to see willow ptarmigan. On our 4th day, we still hadn't had any luck. We were just outside of Attawapiskat, and we were almost getting ready to head south when we happened to run into one of the locals who was maintaining the road. He suggested that we try this smaller access road that connects out with the coast and another dump. So we tried out there. There's like a small willow shrub forest out there. So we tried walking for a few hours. And soon enough, we've actually found willow ptarmigan tracks. Now, the way a big ear works, tracks don't count. You have to see a bird. So we couldn't turn around there. We kept walking. And after another half hour, we saw a willow ptarmigan. So it's pictured top left and also bottom right. So yeah, it's a pretty unique bird. It's all white with a black tail and like a red arc around the eyebrow. We spotted 4 of them. They immediately flushed and flew out of sight. The picture at the bottom, that's my face when I got back after snowshoeing for a few hours. As you can see, it's fairly tiring up there. The middle right picture is actually taken in Nunavut. So the way the border works up there, the ocean is Nunavut and the land's Ontario. So since we were already so close, we walked out about a kilometer into Nunavut just to say we were there. And it's interesting being in Ontario and standing on an ocean and then suddenly being in Nunavut. The other picture up top right is just crossing one of the big ice roads across a river. So that was like the highlight experience of the winter for me. That was in late February. And after that, it was a long few weeks waiting for spring. I was going on the eBird range maps a lot, looking at sightings of birds like woodcocks or killdeer that we typically associate with spring here, and waiting for them to arrive. They were always like painfully close on the other side of Lake Erie, but yeah, it was long waiting until late March. The middle right picture is a system of low pressure, and that's what I've been waiting for all spring. With it, a bunch of robins, blackbirds, and other spring migrants came into Ontario. And then I got really busy again with spring migration. So winter's kind of like the slower period during a big year. Sure, you have to like knock off the woodpeckers and owls, but there's generally not that many birds to chase that aren't overwintering. So once February, March hits, like there's not a ton to do. That all changes when the geese return to Eastern Ontario. So on the big year, late March, early April is really goose time. And I think I spent around 2 weeks in Ottawa searching for geese during that period. As you can see on the left top picture, that's a huge flock of snow geese. Now we get the occasional snow goose here, but there they get up to 100,000 in one group. The one day I saw between 100 and 150,000 snow geese out in the field. They start swirling, they call it a snowstorm as they circle higher and higher in the sky. It's like nothing we see here, nothing compares, not even our huge flocks of Canada geese. Just like the overwhelming sound too. It's something to behold. Middle right or middle bottom, that's 2 cackling geese. And that's a slightly smaller variant on our Canada goose and a slightly more uncommon one. Top middle was the bird we were looking for all spring, and that's called a barnacle goose. Ironically, for that one, I just returned from goose hunting in Ottawa for around a week. I get back home, and then guess what? A barnacle goose is found in Ottawa. I had to go all the way back. One of the more annoying birds of the spring, too, is also a goose, and it was a pink-footed goose. So this bird was also found in Ottawa when I was looking for vultures in Niagara. I raced over and got there by sunrise the next day and spent the next 4 days searching through hundreds of thousands of Canada geese. And yeah, I like looking through geese and I like that kind of birding. But after a few long days of like straining through a scope, sorting through every goose, it really gets to you. I did not end up connecting with the pink-footed goose then, but I did see greater white-fronted geese, which are the ones on the right-hand side of the screen. After that, spring really took off. And it was basically nonstop birding from mid-April all the way through early June. Pictured here are some of my highlights from the spring. Top left is hepatic tanager. And that was the first record for Ontario, around the 3rd for Canada. And I saw that over by Oakville when I was at Point Pelee, and I had to race over to chase it. Middle left is a yellow-throated warbler, and that one was found in Guelph. Bottom left is a Henslow sparrow in Rondo Provincial Park. The middle one is Eurasian tree sparrow in Long Point. Bottom right is a western grebe, and that one was found over near Toronto. And top right is a summer tanager from Point Pelee. So all these birds are really rare in Ontario. And besides the tanager and the warbler, they're the only ones I saw in the province all year. Some more highlights are here. Top left is Kentucky warbler. That was at Long Point. Bottom left are American avocets, and they're near Point Pelee. Middle bottom is a white-winged dove. That one was seen in Port Perry. Bottom right is a yellow-breasted chat from Point Pelee, and top right was scissor-tailed flycatcher east of Toronto. These are definitely some of the highlights of the spring for me. The rarest bird, though, of the spring and of the year was this bird. It's called a marsh sandpiper, and it was the first record ever in Canada and around the 13th ever in North America. This is normally a bird that breeds in Asia and Europe, and it's very rare outside of there. So it was found in Thedford Lagoons, which is in Lambton County, just south of Pinery Provincial Park. It was found by a birder named James Holdsworth while I was at Point Pelee. Now, just not to encourage speeding on anyone else, I definitely did not speed when I drove to see this bird. But yeah, that was one of the more stressful chases of the year. It was near sunset, and I only had an hour to get there. I arrived, practically ran up to the lagoon, saw the bird, and no more than 15 minutes later, it circled up and disappeared to the northwest. Now, at the time we thought it was gone, it actually ended up sticking around a week or so, but you really don't know in a big year, like something could be gone the next day, so you really have to see it when you can. This slide is taken at the tip of Point Pelee. This was without a doubt the highlight of my big year. Standing there for like a month at the end of May, the end of April to the end of May, watching reverse migration off the tip. Every morning at Point Pelee, I'd walk out to the tip, bird there for maybe an hour to 4 hours, and then scour the park for rarities. For the whole month, I either stayed at Camp Henry or in my car, so I basically lived in the park. It was so interesting being there for a month and seeing like the day-to-day changes in bird diversity, what's common one day, what's absent another, and what like weather systems bring in certain birds. I've always had an interest in birds in flight. Like that's been my primary hobby within birding. And being able to watch morning flight Point Pelee every day was such an experience. I loved being there the whole month. So there's a lot of birds here. Some you may recognize, some you may not. A lot of these birds look different in flight. The songbirds in particular, they look like little bullets when they tuck their wings in. So I'm going to do the top birds first, left to right. We have an indigo bunting, an eastern kingbird, Baltimore oriole, black-throated green warbler. And then the next two going down are great crested flycatcher, and beside that on the right is a black Bernian warbler with a brilliant orange throat. The bottom ones are scarlet tanagers, rose-breasted grosbeak, red-headed woodpecker, and northern flicker. On the best day there, I saw 900 Baltimore orioles in one morning, several hundred warblers, around 100 rose-breasted grosbeaks, and 40 red-headed woodpeckers. Let me tell you, seeing all those birds flying over and having my camera working nonstop to try to capture them all, it's exhausting, exhilarating, and like so fun to like have the challenge of identifying all these birds in flight. That they fly over, then they're gone, and they may never come back. This strategy, birding at the tip, really paid off, and I saw some great rarities there. Some highlights are on this slide. Top left, prothonotary warbler, top right, summer tanager. I saw a few of those. The middle bird is a blue grosbeak. I saw 2 blue grosbeaks flying off the tip, and also 2 dick thistles, which is pictured bottom left. And the one on the right is a lark sparrow, which was a bit of a surprise, honestly. It's not a species typically associated with morning flight, and having it bound overhead was, yeah, really exciting. Now, granted, Solitary Warbler may not be that rare, but this one was particularly fun. I was at the top of the tower at Point Pelee. Some of you may have seen that when you were there in the spring. It's like 100-foot tower above the tip. Kind of a questionable decision on the part of the park, like having it there, but I saw the Solitary Warbler off the top. So that bird was probably around 100 feet up off the ground. Throughout May, I saw a lot of different rarities at Point Pelee and other areas. Luckily enough, I didn't have to travel that far. I think the farthest I went in May would have been Ottawa, which, like, granted, maybe 8 hours away. But when Jeremy Bensett did his big year, he had to drive all the way to Thunder Bay and back. So I was not too jealous about that. In late May, I led a hike with Ezra for the Huron Fringe Birding Festival. And it was a bird until you drop style day. We started well before dawn and we finished near sunset. As you can see on our checklist bottom left, that's all the areas that we traveled. So basically, like, all the way from McGregor Point up to Dyers Bay. If I'm remembering right, I think we saw 114 birds that day, which it was a pretty good day. But honestly, I was a bit nervous going into it because I thought if I was tied down guiding a hike, I may miss a rare bird somewhere else. Well, this didn't turn out to be the case. In fact, leading the hike worked very well for me. Midway through the day, we were by Cape Croker, near Shingaming, when I stopped the group to have a break. I saw a red-tailed hawk fly overhead and then a broadwing, so I thought, what the heck? Why don't we hawk watch here for a few minutes? A few turkey vultures went over, and then a large bird similar to a red-tailed hawk, but with much longer, narrow wings. I knew this bird from studying it a lot in field guides, and it was one I was really hoping to see during my big year. It was a Swainson's hawk. And it was actually the first record for the Bruce Peninsula. It was found around a week before a Cabot Head by Stefan, who's here. And after that, it was seen up by Tobermory, and then hadn't been seen after that. So a week later, I just happened to chance into this bird like 100 kilometers south of where it had been seen. And that was my only shot at seeing that all year. So just like really lucky that I led a hike for the Huron Fringe. Also this year, I think I'm leading 5 hikes for them. So feel free to come out. We may get another Swainson's talk. In early June, I took a trip to Rainy River in extreme northwestern Ontario. It was about 24 hours to drive up there. We stayed midway through. I went up with Ezra. We stayed midway through near Thunder Bay, camping in the car, and then headed on to Rainy River. So for any birder doing a big year in Ontario, trying to make like a serious attempt, Rainy River is a critical spot to hit. This is because there's some species out there that only breed in that spot in Ontario. These are Western birds, more commonly associated with breeding on the prairies, but here they have a small foothold in Ontario. Top left is a black-billed magpie, and then going over to the right-hand side of the screen is marbled godwit and sharp-tailed grouse. Bottom right is Western meadowlark. On that trip, I had 6 new birds, and by late June, I was seeing at 333 species, only around 10 shy of the record. So bottom left is not a bird. You may be able to see that. That's a white-tailed jackrabbit. And that was actually one of the highlights of the trip. That's only the 4th record of that mammal for Ontario and iNaturalist. So it's really a prairie species that only has a small foothold near the border. And previous to a few years ago, really wasn't documented in Ontario. So that was quite exciting. During the summer, I worked several jobs because frankly, the gas prices had put a hole in my big year budget. I worked for Ontario Parks. I also did consulting jobs and did a few data and entry contracts. During that time, I somehow squeezed in a trip to North Carolina to do a pelagic boat trip. I've never done this before. It's where you go out on the ocean, maybe like a 10-hour trip, and you search for birds that are only found there. I recommend it if you can handle being on the ocean. Me being from Bruce County, don't have a lot of experience with that. I got violently seasick. Do not recommend. Somehow during the summer, I didn't miss any birds for my big year. I thought I would, as sometimes I was working 10, 12-day stretches with no breaks. The bird bottom middle is a glossy ibis, and it turned up on Manitoulin Island on the one day I had off of work. So just like a few lucky things worked out that way. The ferry was fully booked that day, but one of my friends, Yarmo, had the car booked on the ferry, and he took me up to see it. So as much of a big year as a solo thing, there's so many like chance encounters with birds and so much help from the birding community. So it's really a group effort. The other pictures are just like me working with coworkers. And the middle top picture is a yellow-crowned night heron I saw in Hamilton. It's interesting living in a spot like Ontario where the day length varies so drastically during a year. When I saw the night heron, that was after work, and I still had 3 hours to drive down to Hamilton and see it, and another bird, a king rail, before sunset. And those would also be my only individuals of those species all year. I think I added around 5 or 6 species during the summer. So some, but overall it's pretty quiet. Because during a big year, I cleaned up all of my common species during spring migration. So by the summer, all I needed were rarities and some lingering migrants that I could find in the fall. Things that wouldn't show up until September or October. After I was done work, I got into birding. And I was basically out as often as I could be from early September through late November. This day, I didn't add any new birds, but it was a big highlight of my big year. I was leading a hike for the OFO down at Holiday Beach, and we happened to chance into this amazing day for broad-winged hawk migration. Over 30,000 broad-winged hawks streamed overhead, with some kettles comprising of like hundreds or even up to 4,000 birds. Like in Bruce County, we get some kettles of hawks, but I'm excited if I see like 20 or 30. So seeing thousands overhead was a wonderful experience. There's a lot of other highlights in the fall too. Seeing a purple sandpiper at Presqu'île Provincial Park. The bird's pictured top right, and I'm pictured top left watching it. Not sure if you can see it on here. It's like a tiny speck off by the waves. That was a lifer for me, as was the bird that's bottom right. That's a Townsend's warbler. Now, I have a bit of a story to tell about the Townsend's warbler. It may be small, but that bird caused me the most trouble of any bird all year. When it was initially found at Rondeau Provincial Park, I was near Guelph. I thought, no biggie, I'll chase it and see it. It was visiting a bird bath and been seen there quite frequently all day. I got there, they're like, no, it hasn't been seen for an hour. I waited until sunset, nothing. The next day I was back at sunrise, nothing. I spent the entire day, I did not see it. The third day I thought I'd drive over near Lambton County, lake watch there for a while. I figured the bird might be gone, and then if it was seen, I'd drive over. Well, the other guy doing a big year, Ezra, he saw it first thing. I drove over, I missed it. I spent the entire day, I missed it. So at this point, I'd probably spent, 14 hours in the yard plus driving time. I returned home to Bruce that weekend after a cold snap where all the birds had disappeared out of the park. I was sure the bird was gone, right? Well, no, it was not. It showed up that weekend at Rondeau, which is 5 hours away from my house on the peninsula. I drove back again. So by this point, I'd put in some 31 hours driving and waiting in the yard for that small bird. I waited another hour, and finally Alessandra spotted it at the bird bath. So it was a bit of a relief, but it was also such like an enormous burden off my shoulders for not having to return there again. It may look similar to a black-throated green warbler, which is commonly found around this area. And similar to some of the other birds I've mentioned, this bird is a black-throated green warbler's western counterpart. So a lot of birds we get in Ontario have a similar species that breeds out west. And occasionally they show up in Ontario. The bird above the Townsend's warbler is a cattle egret. And unlike the warbler, that one was so easy. Driving into the park, I stopped on the side of the road where that bird had been reported, and I ticked it off within seconds. When I got into the park, actually, I forgot to mention that, and I got to see the warbler. They were like, oh, it was seen 5 minutes ago, and it disappeared. So I thought I missed it because I stopped for the cattle egret. Bottom left is a Pomeranian Jaeger. and I saw that bird at Hamilton. Conditions that Jaegers like are not great for birders. Generally very strong winds, often rain, and cold temperatures associated with a passing cold front. I spent many days either at Kettle Point and around Pinery or Van Wagner's Beach in Hamilton during the fall, waiting for these birds to fly by. And then in early October, things really started picking up with rarities. I got this bird down Windsor, number 347, my record-breaking bird, a tropical kingbird. This species is very rare in Ontario, and this was only the 5th record at the time. Ironically, I was there with Jeremy Bensett, who had the previous big year record. In a funny twist of fate, I was with Jeremy when I saw my record-tying bird, magnificent frigate bird, and my record-breaking bird, tropical kingbird. So that was kind of a fun way to break the record. After that, I had a fantastic run for rare birds in early November. These 3 I saw 3 days in a row. The first is a cave swallow, top left. Cave swallows are kind of an interesting rarity in Ontario. Some years they're completely absent, and some years we see dozens or even hundreds of them showing up. So this species is similar to our cliff swallow that breeds around Bruce Gray, but it's from the Gulf Coast, Texas, Arizona, and Mexico. In November, if there's a specific weather condition, which is low pressure originating off the Gulf Coast and blasting into Ontario for a few days, we sometimes get cave swallows. I saw that weather condition, low pressure, coming in early November. And I was tracking it for days as it moved towards Ontario. When it hit the province, there were strong southwest winds right along Lake Ontario, so I thought that would be my best bet. I drove down to 50 Point, which some of you may know. It's a nature reserve near Hamilton. And I waited for cave swallows to fly by. This is really like where my knowledge of weather played in. Like if I didn't know about that, I may have gone to the completely wrong spot and missed this bird. But after around 2 hours of waiting, I saw a flock of swallows, which in November in Ontario, if you see swallows, it's a pretty uncommon event. So I could basically assume they were cave swallows. It turns out they were, 25 in fact. And by the end of the day, I'd seen 48 cave swallows, which is the 2nd highest record for numbers in one day in Ontario. The next day I went back, mainly to look for more cave swallows. And as luck would have it, a northern gannet showed up at 50 Point, right where I was. I was a bit inland looking for swallows at the time. And when it was reported, maybe a kilometer out by the lake, I full out sprinted down the road, maybe Tom Cruise style. And eventually I got there, out of breath. I hadn't had anything to eat that day, of course. Out of breath and barely able to hold up my binoculars. Well, they said the bird disappeared, and I was crestfallen. But then after a few minutes of scanning, we refound it on the lake. So a bird like this, it's a seabird. The northern gannet looks like nothing we get in Ontario. It has a massive wingspan, like a gull, but even longer, and a large, slender bill that uses to catch fish. This bird also has a unique hunting strategy. It'll search for fish, hovering maybe 50, 80 feet above the water, and then plunge dive in by tucking its wings. I didn't get to see its feeding strategy, but it did fly right by us, offering great views. The day after that, my streak of luck continued. A juvenile purple gallinule was found in Durham region. This is a bird from Florida, and it's also very rare in Ontario. Not one is seen every year, but I think Ontario's around like 20, 30 records. So I was hoping to see one during my big year, but couldn't be counted on. That one was a fairly easy chase too. It was just sitting beside a small creek, looking a bit like it had taken a wrong turn somewhere along the way. I spent a lot of the fall lake watching, as I mentioned earlier, looking for Jaegers and other pelagic birds. Some birds, including Sabine gulls, Jaegers, and phalaropes, all breed up in the Arctic, and they mainly winter on the Atlantic Ocean. Occasionally, though, some show up in Ontario. It seems some of these birds have a migration route that follows either the St. Lawrence, where they just go overland, and with certain weather conditions, they can be pushed towards shore and we can see them. So during the fall, I saw all 3 Jaeger species, Pomeran, long-tailed, and parasitic. Sabine skull, red phalarope, and many others. I also saw thousands of migrating ducks, including these black and white-winged scoters. They're pictured top left. On the top right, you can see me with some friends lake watching at Van Wagner's Beach. That day, as is the case many days lake watching, conditions aren't quite right. You have to be there just in case, but sometimes hours and hours go by without anything noteworthy flying by. During this time, we tend to get bored, and being young, rambunctious birders, we do things like have running races to pass the time. One of these birds is a Pomeranian Jaeger. It's actually the same one that I pictured earlier, also at Van Wagner's Beach. Just after I saw the purple gallinule, I got a chance at redemption. The pink-footed goose, my nemesis, had been seen again in Ottawa. This time it was seen even farther away, and it was an 8-hour drive to get there. At this time, Ezra was going up to James Bay to look for rarities with the passing weather system. I was kind of gambling at this point. I thought I'd see more in Southern Ontario instead of going up there. So I drove to Ottawa instead and looked for the pink-footed goose. We spent a whole day looking and didn't see it. And then after staying at a friend's house, we were out again the next morning. The way goose migration in Ottawa works is in the spring, everything passes by very fast, maybe in a day or two. But in the fall, they're more staggered, and they often stay weeks or even months feeding before the fall frees up when they fly south. During this time, there's thousands of snow geese and also thousands of Canada geese along the river. And with them occasionally are pink-footed geese and barnacle geese. So this bird was seen by one person, and then locals put in effort and couldn't find it. So it was a bit of a gamble if we could encounter it or not. So the next morning we were out first light, and I was scouring geese that were flying off the river. I was with Alessandra at the time, and also a few other friends, Isabel and also William Conzi, who's doing a big year. And I saw a smaller goose mixed in with a flock of Canada geese. It had a dark head, whereas Canada geese have a white patch. It was smaller with silverish wings and a white tail. It was a pink-footed goose. After searching for days in the spring, I'd finally seen my nemesis bird. Unfortunately for the other people in my party, it flashed by and disappeared behind the tree line before they saw it. We tracked the geese flying inland now and tried to figure out which direction they were headed. William jumped in the front seat, and the following 10 minutes were honestly a rather scary time to be in the car. You may not know this if you haven't driven with a birder, but if you get between a birder and a life bird, it's a dangerous thing. Somehow, though, we tracked down the geese. We followed the flock inland and saw that they were landing in the cornfield. We were watching them landing, and finally we saw a pink-footed goose land with them. And this is one of the biggest surprises to me during the year, that we managed to follow these geese inland and somehow found the one that was different again. So the pictures here from when we refound it on the field, and top right is Alessandra watching them. I actually did a presentation for another naturalist club back in Carden. And at the time, I think I cursed myself. I said I didn't have to fly for my big year or chase anything very far away. I should not have said that. In late November, a Bullock's Oriole turned up in Kenora District, only 4 hours from the border. So to see this bird, I'd either have to drive a few days and maybe miss stuff in Southern Ontario or fly. Well, I actually flew because the border to Manitoba is closer than flying to Thunder Bay. So I flew all the way to Winnipeg on a no-frills airline, which gave me no end of troubles, with a few other birders, Ezra, William, and Susan Nagy, who's also doing a big year. We rented a vehicle, drove the remaining 5 hours, and arrived in Dryden in Kenora District. After around an hour of waiting at the feeder, this Bullock's Oriole flew in. It may look somewhat familiar. Again, like I said, species have Western counterparts. This species is very similar to the Baltimore Oriole, and formerly they're actually considered one species. So I'm not gonna lie, I was very scared about missing this after spending hundreds of dollars and flying all the way in Northern Ontario. But the bird cooperated and it was still there. Just because we didn't know if we'd have to spend a few days, our return flight was booked for 2 days in the future. And that left us with some time to kill in Northern Ontario. During that time, we drove south of Thunder Bay, around 10 hours away, and birded the small towns along the shore of Lake Superior. These small towns have a history of attracting rare birds. And in the past, some mind-boggling rarities have showed up there. Nothing was being seen at the time, though, but we figured we'd give it our best shot and try to find something. This small town is called Rossport, and it's around 2 hours south of Thunder Bay. For some reason, Rossport's a rarity magnet. It's just like a town with maybe 50 houses. But over the years, its list of rarities comes close to like what's been seen in North Bruce total. I just like this picture, so I thought I'd include it. We were there for sunrise on the day after seeing the oriole. Birding around Rossport, we had some nice highlights, including a red crossbill, top left, Bohemian waxwing and evening grosbeak, right of that, and then the boreal chickadee on the right. Bottom picture is just us birding at Rossport. Now you see the middle right picture is a small green wooden carving. It resembles an alien with 2 dark black eyes. This is not a bird, but it was kind of freaking us out because we were walking through Rossport and we saw one. We thought, oh, one of the local kids must have made it. And then we saw another and another. We drove to the town next to that and we found more. All the towns around Rossport are dotted with these strange green aliens. We were very confused and we were thinking it was something like a cult movie. We were about to be murdered. Well, we did a bit of Google investigating. And it turns out there's a carver up there. And there's like a charity that he donates the money to after people buy these green wooden aliens. And it's like a strange community thing up there. We must have seen like near 100 during our trip, but it was honestly kind of strange. So I thought I'd mention it. After the oriole, I didn't add any new birds for a few weeks. During like late November on a big year, you just don't know. Like any bird you see could be your last. I think on Jeremy's big year, his last bird was on like November 20th, and he saw nothing after that. So you just don't know. I was prepared to end at what I was at then, 357 species. But it turned out I had a bit of luck left up my sleeve. Now this bird's going to be very unfamiliar for folks here. It's called a dovekie. And it's a seabird that's very rarely seen inland. This one was only the 5th record ever in Ontario. Normally they're found way out in the ocean. Even seeing them from land along the coast is rare. This bird was likely blown inland during a huge northeaster system. And a few days after the system passed, it was found in Toronto. This was another kind of stressful bird to chase. I was in Bruce County at the time. It was reported in Toronto like maybe 11 a.m. And this was in December, so there's limited daylight that time of year. I started racing down. Some of my friends were watching at the time, and they were giving me minute-by-minute updates. Around an hour passed, it was still being seen. And then I got the message. It had flown out deep into Lake Ontario, and people had lost it in the waves. Now, the bird may look fairly large here on the screen, but if you can believe it, it's actually smaller than a robin. It's only about this big. It's such a tiny little seabird. So if it disappeared out on the waves of Lake Ontario, I thought it was gone for good. I had to chance it though and keep going, just in case it was refound. And sure enough, it was. Around an hour before I arrived, I got the news that the bird returned to the small harbor it was frequenting. I was very excited, but still nervous. And then I was just pulling into the parking lot, maybe 5 minutes away, and I got another text that flew away. More running ensued, and I ran over a kilometer out to the tip of the break wall there. No bird. 10 minutes of waiting. Oh, it's seen right at the parking lot where I parked my car. I ran all the way back. Text, it's back at the point. So I ran a total of 3 kilometers, and I will not lie, I was very out of breath by the end of it. I collapsed on the side of the rocks here, and sure enough, the dovekie was still there waiting for me. I would have been happy just seeing it fly away at that point, not even getting a picture. But this bird turned out to be one of the most cooperative birds of the entire year for photography. It swam within feet of me. I could have touched it if I wanted to. It showed no fear and even gave me some great photo ops. That wouldn't even be my last bird of 2022, though. The last bird would be this, a pixelated shape on the screen. This is actually a great cormorant, and it's another seabird that's normally only found on the Atlantic coast. This one was also found on Lake Ontario, this time in Hamilton. Again, I was back in Bruce County, and it was found around 4 p.m., so I knew I definitely wasn't getting there that day. The other big ear birders had chased it, and Ezra managed to track it down. And at this point, he was only a few behind me, so I was getting a bit nervous. I thought, okay, I'm going to try my maybe craziest strategy this year. I drove down at night, and I arrived at Hamilton after 9 p.m. I walked out to the harbor with my scope, and I tried scanning through the hundreds of roosting gulls with the light of just the harbor. And yeah, I saw a bunch of dark shapes. I did not see the cormorant. I was back there again the next morning. This time, though, I did see it. I watched it. We were there like maybe half an hour before sunrise. And eventually the sun came up and I saw a slightly larger cormorant sitting with the gulls. Unlike the familiar double-crested cormorant that we get here, this one's a lot larger, almost twice as heavy. And it really stands out among the other cormorants and gulls. It just towers above them. It also has like a white throat patch that sets it apart. So after sunrise, we saw the shape. And then as more light came, I saw the white throat, and eventually it flew off. Granted, our views weren't that good, but I was relieved just seeing it at that point. The rest of December, I spent looking for gulls around southern Ontario, hoping to turn up something rare I hadn't already seen, but it wasn't to be. And I ended up seeing 359 birds on December 31st. I spent the last day of the year doing a rarity blitz, starting around Sarnia and then working down the Rondeau Provincial Park and ending out at Point Pelee. Bottom right was a great horned owl that I found near Rondeau. It wasn't really the best weather day to end out a big year. It was above zero with rain and heavy fog all day, but I was still happy to be out. On the left, I'm pictured with my car, the trusty Gyrfalcon, which honestly, I'm happy with that it managed to survive the whole year. I did have some major issues with it, but I put 70,000 kilometers on it. So yeah. I'm going to go over a summary of the big year now with some stats and some of my favorite finds. So these are some of my self-found highlights. So some people may not be familiar with this in birding, like this aspect, but I'm always very passionate about self-found birds. So previous to my big year, I really didn't twitch much. And I think I chased birds out of the county maybe like 7 or 8 times. I mean, mainly like finding birds on my own. And during the big year, I set a personal challenge to see if I could find and identify 300 species on my own without help from others. I got fairly close to this and I ended up with 290 species. I could have got higher, I think. Maybe like the tops for self-found would be like 300 or 315. But a big year was more draining than I thought it would be. So much time has to be spent on the road looking for common birds I had to find or chasing rarities, that there's really limited time left to look for self-found birds. I did end up connecting with a lot of rarities though, and I have my highlights listed below. Among those were a few standouts, including the blue grosbeak, summer tanager, Pacific loon, little blue heron, Swainson's hawk, cave swallow, and razorbill. Black-legged kittiwake seemed to like me in the fall, and I found at least 8 of them. I have a few interesting stats now too. This is a progress timeline of my year list throughout the year and what I was at each month. So as you can see, there's a big spike in January and then really not much new until April. And then once you get past the summer, it's like 1 or 2 a month if I'm lucky. This next graph is species seen per week. So like my year list and how it went up each week. As you can see, again, there's like an initial rise in the early January period, and then a huge spike at the end of April, early May. And then it kind of plateaus and remains the same for the rest of the year. Similar to that one, this is new species seen per week. I think this may surprise some people. It's actually the highest for January. That's like Ontario birding, and I saw 92 species in early January. I wasn't trying at the time, but I actually set a record for number of species seen in January in Ontario, and I ended up with 133. And if you look again, there's another peak like late April through mid-May. And then after that, look how many birds I was adding like per week. It's like 0, 0, maybe 2 if I'm lucky. I put this map together using a online website that kind of like takes eBird sightings in every spot I'd made a checklist all year and puts it into a map. So this map comprises every eBird checklist during 2022. As you can see, I covered every single county in Ontario. And there's like heavy coverage around all of Southern Ontario, all of the Bruce Peninsula, a lot near Ottawa. And then you can see kind of the map of like the trips I took up north. Because like no birders had gone on the winter road before, we tried eBirding everything we saw, including like every single raven and chickadee. So there's just like dense purple up there. Some other random fun stats listed here. So the number of kilometers I drove, around 75,000, which is about the same as going around the world twice. It's kind of strange breaking it down that way. I didn't think of it as that much driving, but 4,000 kilometer trips really add up. Number of major car issues, 3. Now, this is just like the reality of owning a secondhand car. I'm sure a lot of you know this. The worst of these was during May when I had a suspension issue and my car was out of commission for over a week. Luckily, my parents loaned me their car during this time, so I wasn't totally stranded. But besides that, there was a few major setbacks. I saw 47 species during my big year that I'd never seen previous, which is quite a lot. I had some common ones too, like southern birds like worm-eating warbler, American avocet, that occur in the province every year that I just never connected with. Even things like willet and fish crow. I visited all 50 counties in Ontario, which was another one of my goals of the big year. Honestly, I think seeing rarities and seeing a lot of birds is often hyped up the most about a big year. But for me, like seeing the province, like the north in the winter, like how many people have seen the Arctic Ocean of Ontario in the winter, and like the rolling wetlands of Long Point, and the western prairies of Rainy River, and the hills of Northern Ontario and the valleys of Ottawa. Combined, it just like, there's so many special memories that I have of the places, not even considering the birds. Number of Cliff Bars I ate. I lost track around January. Yeah, they're really not a great big year of food. Like they're good in a way where they're fairly cheap and they have a lot of nutrition. They can be frozen solid. I remember on the winter road, it was -46. And we took a cook stove because we had freeze-dried meals. Well, someone screwed up the planning, not me actually this time. And we took isobutane, which does not work in the cold. So we had no heat for food on the whole trip. And I kind of survived on Cliff Bars and dried fruit. So I remember after packing up the tent, having like a frozen Cliff Bar in my mouth like a popsicle for an hour, waiting for it to thaw out. I think that really turned me off Cliff Bars. So I also had a few cavities after the big year because of it. So if I don't see another Cliff Bar during my life, I'm going to be pretty happy. Number of times I questioned my sanity. Yeah, same like Cliff Bars, definitely a lot. Like driving between Ottawa, Bruce County, Southern Ontario, and Thunder Bay, and sometimes during the middle of the night. And many of these times I was thinking, what am I doing? Why am I driving this far to see one bird? But in the end, it was worth it, and I wouldn't take anything back. This is like all the OBR seabirds I saw last year. And for those unfamiliar, an OBR seabird is a rarity that requires documentation in the province. So an example would be like the dovekey that I saw, or Rufus hummingbird, or the gannet, something about that level. So these are all their banding codes for those who know what those are. And that basically sums up my big year in a nutshell. I'd like to open it up for questions now. either on Zoom or in person.
Hi, I just want to mention, something I planned to mention in my introduction, that I remember Josh Vanderbilt was coming and giving a talk on his.
Oh, wow.
When we were at the library.
Full circle.
Thanks for being on the position.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I'm not sure how we want to handle questions. I think maybe in-person ones first, and then people either put comments on Zoom or raise your hand. So, okay.
Yeah, a couple of slides back with your stats for the total number of birds.
Yep. This one? Yeah, so that's the way this website works. And you may notice the total species here is 377. And that's because I took a trip into the States and I couldn't filter that out. But in Ontario, I saw 681,000 birds that I put in eBird. But I guess the real number is somewhere in the millions, maybe like 4 or 5 million. Anyone else?
Did you have a sponsor?
Not like an exact sponsor. I did have the Huron Fringe Birding Festival, which were a huge help during my big year. I did advertising for them, and I also led a hike, so that was a major help. But besides them, like honestly, the Bruce Birding Club, all the support they gave me, either like giving me gas cards, giving me optics, giving me encouragement throughout the year, that was more than I could ask of any sponsor. Any other questions? Okay. Yeah, so this is something that definitely gave me an edge in 2022. Even in Josh's big year in 2012, he mainly went by an OnBirds, which is an email listserv. But during my big year, information is so streamlined now that like I could just get a text at any moment and instantly know where a bird is. This is because there's a platform we use called Discord. And if people see a rare bird, they put it in there, and in real time, they put like a Google Maps pin. So anytime someone finds something rare, it's shared instantly with the whole province. Anyone else? Yep. Honestly, I doubt it, though. I did really enjoy the experience, so I couldn't totally rule it out, but if I did, it wouldn't be for a very long time. Yep. There were a few that I didn't see that they saw. Nothing common. There was one, a black guillemot, and that was seen on James Bay when Ezra took a northern trip. And then William found a Say's phoebe. So I missed a few, but those are the only ones that really come to mind. Anyone else? Ooh, interesting. Honestly, like it may be a fairly common species, but those cross foxes up north, they were so breathtaking and so calm, like coming right in beside the road and allowing us to photograph them. If not that, probably the white-tailed jackrabbit or a fox snake, but there's so many highlights to choose from. Anyone else?
Thank you. Kiah, first of all, I'd like to say that you're an inspiration to all of us. You've inspired all of us to never, ever do a big year. Just, looking at, going over some of his things there, looking at some of Kiah's adventures there, he had some attributes. Like, first of all, he was determined. My God, was he determined. And he was persistent. And if you want to put it in simpler words, he was just plain stubborn, Yeah, and as far as physical discomfort goes, I can assure you that nobody in this audience has ever had their nostrils frozen shut. You are unique in this room in that regard, as well as, of course, being an Ontario record holder. You suffered cold, you suffered fatigue. It looks like times you were walking and half asleep. The emotional high you must have had when you achieved your goal was probably phenomenal. I don't know what you do at age 20 or so when you break a record like that. It's going to be hard to repeat that. And socially wise in competition, there's attitudes like win at all costs, your opponent is your enemy. But what you've shown us is that you're a really good person socially, because you help people find birds. I know that you took some of those birders on a big year who were your competitors and found birds that you had seen up in the Bruce that they hadn't found. And in return, they did to you. And I want to say that makes you a pretty class guy. Anyways, it was a wonderful presentation, and I want to, on behalf of all of you, I'd like to thank you for doing this. And maybe we'll see you with the Bruce Birding Club once again, one time or two again. Thank you very much, Kiah.
One more thing I forgot to mention in my presentation. The other guy's doing a big year. Ezra and William both ended up with 357 species. So only 2 behind me. And Andy ended up with 338, even though he was working basically the whole year. So just so you know where the other guys ended up.